Hey there everybody, Scotia here with the third review for the third chapter of the Street Fighter 6 comic prequel series by UDON, and it's crazy that we're already nearly done. Obviously, we knew from the start this was going to be a 4-issue series, but it's just kind of crazy that we're already, on chapter 3. Next week is the finale, it's the final chapter, and then the week after that is the release of Street Fighter 6 itself. So yeah, it's just crazy how quickly things have come, Yeah, chapter 3. I'm going to be following the review format I did for the previous chapter, if you've missed that. Basically, I'm not going to go over the whole chapter like page for page like I did for the first chapter in my JoJo reviews. I'm just purely just going to kind of skim through the parts that I don't really have much to say about and kind of focus on the parts that I do have something to say about. So if there's a particular part about the issue that you were interested in and you have something to talk about but I didn't cover, by all means please put it in the comments, ask me about it. I'll see. I always see all the comments. I may not reply to all of them, but I'll at least see them at some point. So if you have a question or you want to talk about something that I didn't discuss, just put it in the comments and just ask about it. If you want to see my opinion on it, if you just want to hear what I have to say about it. But yeah, so that's just what it's going to be basically. If you watch the previous chapter review for chapter 2, then you'll know what's going to go on here. But with that out of the way, let's begin. So the first part I want to talk about is later on in the chapter when Luke and the rest of his PMC company buddies or whatever, when basically they're called in to meet with their contractor or the person who's hired them, which is JP. And yeah, one thing I said last chapter, I think, was that I was kind of surprised, because obviously we knew JP was the one orchestrating all of this, and because he's playable in 6, and we've known that for a while now. So it was always obvious that JP was kind of the main one pulling the strings in terms of what was going on in this chapter, and not just this chapter, the whole comic prequel series, I mean, and the one pulling those strings and doing everything to Ken that's been happening to him. So we knew all that, and I was surprised because even in the last chapter, chapter 2, it was JP just came across as really innocent in everything, and I was even I think at one point I even suggested oh, maybe this hacker group Amnesia or something, maybe they're not separate from JP in the sense that JP is the kind of figurehead above everything pulling the strings, but Amnesia was one thing and JP was his own thing as well. But we find out later in the chapter that no, that's not the case. But one thing I am surprised about overall is just from the moment he's first introduced, JP's menacing villain aura finally kicks in here. But it's to a degree that I don't know, it just felt a bit jarring to me. Going from the previous chapter where I was honestly man, he seems really innocent. I'm actually wondering how much of this is actually JP's doing, because he can pretty much have a solid alibi for most things. But then in this chapter it's no, pretty much everything was him, which we kind of knew was the case. But I don't know, just the jump from JP being this kind of not innocent, but this kind of just regular old guy who just was just standing around and talking to people, and then in this chapter just from the moment when Luke and the PMC people go to meet him, it's just everything about JP just seems more menacing. He seems just kind of more, I don't know, just more, I guess the only word I can think of at the moment is menacing. But there's a part where Luke, where obviously they're talking about Ken, and we've got to find Ken, and he's the main suspect in the terrorist bombings and all this stuff. And Luke has a flashback to his character story in Street Fighter 5 when his father was killed in a terrorist bombing when he was a kid. And there's there's flashes of that, and the memories of kind of the chaos, and finding out his father had died, and the kind of the news people talking about all the victims. And it's a kind of juxtaposition between this bombing that Luke experienced as a kid that cost him his father, and then kind of compared to this, where Ken is accused of this bombing, and then he has Mel, who's been forming this bond with as he's been taking him to Neyshal, and just seeing Mel and seeing how Mel's just so kind of not shut down or anything, but just how kind of well, obviously the whole experience has taken a toll on Mel, and that kind of thing of obviously this is when Luke kind of kicks in and is just I've got to take the initiative on this, I'll find Ken and I'll take the lead. But there's a part where he's lost in this daydream flashback, and then JP whacks his stick on a desk, and it's done to basically snap Luke out of it. But I don't know, just stuff like that where I was oh, I don't know, just JP just to me had this way more of a menacing feel to him throughout this chapter. You could clearly tell even before the later stuff, because obviously later on in the chapter is when he just fully like takes the mask off and reveals that he's the mastermind behind everything. But even before that, like in this scene where Luke is meeting with JP with all the other like PMC militiamen, I thought JP was coming across like way more kind of like threatening, and just like, it was more apparent that he was, you know, he's a bad guy, he's evil. Like, maybe not so much he's the mastermind, but like just compared to his earlier stuff when like talking with Ken and like other people in the first two chapters, like he definitely just seemed like, I know I've said it like 800 times, which is more menacing. Like it just to me it was just a big kind of jump from like JP kind of coming across as so innocent in the first two chapters to now just like, no, he's fully like full blown, like he is 100% the mastermind behind all this. He's clearly the villain, and it's weird because it is, I think, like we knew that already. Like I said before, like we knew JP was going to be the bad guy, we knew he was the mastermind behind everything, so like it's not too much of a shock. But it's just, I don't know, I'm kind of like saying this in like a criticism way, but like it's not a big deal. Like I'm not like, oh, they ruined, like the writing's awful. It just stood out to me, the kind of just how obvious the change was to me. Like I don't know if other people noticed this or if this is just me, but like compared to the previous chapter where I was literally saying like, oh, maybe Amnesia is its own thing, but obviously still run by JP, but like JP seems pretty innocent in a lot of things, like he's doing a good job of hiding it, to then just full blown, like even when he's like not talking to Ken and like other people, like when he's meant to be, you know, just this innocent kind of like benefactor or contractor or like whatever, like just his presence and the way he acts and just like some of the shots and the panels and the artwork, like it just makes him look more menacing, more evil, more kind of like more apparent that he's the bad guy. So that's just the thing I just wanted to talk about. Like again, it probably sounds like I'm criticizing it, and like in a little bit of a way I am, but like it's not a, like I said, it's not a big deal. It's just something I just noticed that I just was like, oh, okay, that's interesting that they've just kind of just fully cranked that up. In a way, it's kind of like, I kind of think this should have been more than 4 chapters, because I feel like there should have been a chapter before this, maybe like between 2 and 3, where JP kind of like shifted a bit, like see more of that shift instead of just going from like, oh, JP's just this, you know, obviously we know JP is JP, but we know like he's, you know, Johan, to then becoming, basically, actually I just thought of a good like way to describe it. It's like chapter 1 and 2 he was like Johan Petrovich, and now in this chapter he's just JP, and like I didn't really feel like there was a middle. So that thing of like, you know, it just felt a bit odd to kind of like just not skip it, but just kind of like jump to, you know, the shift from him being Johan to then him being JP, because I knew there was going to be a moment in this comic series where like he was going to go from Johan to JP, and I, you know, it just kind of feels like we've already just gotten to the JP side without really kind of like seeing it. But you know, like I said, it's not a big deal. Like it's still effective, JP's still effective and all that. But yeah, it's just something I just noticed really. The only other real thing I want to talk about with this scene is that there was a nice bit with Luke and Mel at the end, because obviously at the end of it, Luke has said like, oh, I'll go find Ken, like I'll go bring him in by morning, because I think at this point Luke has definitely decided like himself that Ken is guilty. Like obviously we know Ken isn't, and Mel even says like, you know, my dad is innocent, he wouldn't do that. But Luke is pretty much, I think he's kind of like, to go, you know, hand in hand with the flashback to when his father died, is kind of like, I think Luke is definitely, he's putting a bit too much of himself into the situation. You know, not saying that's a bad thing or even a good thing, but you know, he's clearly relating to this whole scenario, you know, like personally based on his history. But he has a thing where like, you know, he's clearly going to go get Ken, and like he meets with Mel and they have a bit of a conversation, and like they both acknowledge like, you know, this has got to happen, but you know, they're still friends, and like they shake hands. It's just a really nice thing. It's a good like, not send off, but it's just a nice little kind of, not even conclusion, but just a nice way to kind of like move the relationship on between Luke and Mel, which I think honestly so far has probably been like my surprise hit of this prequel series. Like I've really enjoyed almost everything Mel's done in this series, especially the first chapter where he was a lot of the focus. Yeah, he's just been a really, you know, cool aspect of this, and you know, seeing more of Mel, because I've always been a fan of Mel and I've always been interested in seeing more of him. Never thought, you know, in this way with this story involving Ken, but it's just nice to get more of Mel, and I just like his relationship with Luke. Like I honestly wouldn't be against seeing them, you know, together again in the future, like beyond this storyline, like maybe, I know, in Street Fighter 7 or whatever. Like not saying like Mel has to be playable, but like, you know, if Luke comes back at some point, which he probably will, like it'd be nice if, you know, like Mel showed up in some of his endings and stuff like that. I think that'd be nice. But yeah, this is a really cool bit where that kind of like harkens back to the first chapter where like Luke, when he's trying to bond with Mel, like, oh, I'll add you to this like mobile game, and he sends a friend request to Mel, but Mel never like accepts it at the time. But now, like when Luke is going, like Mel finally accepts it. Just a really nice moment. I thought that was a really kind of like I said, like a good kind of like full circle of their whole relationship in terms of like Mel finally like accepting the friendship, like accepting Luke's hospitality and like his offer to, you know, be pals and stuff like that. So I thought that was nice. So a bit later on, towards the end of the chapter, Ken finally meets JP, and JP basically, like I said, like literally like full mask off, reveals his presence, his whole not like the whole plan, I guess. I suppose there's more that we have yet to know about why JP is doing all of this. But he basically, you know, reveals to Ken his involvement as the mastermind behind all of this and everything like that. And obviously Ken is shocked. And basically JP has this bit of like a villain monologue where he goes on about stuff. But then, you know, he reveals that he has Mel kidnapped, and obviously Ken is very distraught. And, you know, honestly a bit like twisted here. Like I was not expecting JP to kind of like go to such lengths, and like I've heard people say, oh, this is the darkest like Street Fighter has gone, and like I can't dispute that, but I don't know, I feel like Street Fighter may have in the past, you know, with some of it, maybe not as blatant, like as much like in your face as this moment here is, but I feel like, you know, in the backstories of certain characters, I'm sure they've gone darker than this, but it's still like, not to diminish this and, you know, this moment, but yeah, JP is very much shown as quite twisted here, and basically tells Ken like either, you know, sacrifice your son to save, you know, the lives of innocent people, or, you know, sacrifice the lives of innocent people to save your son. And obviously very just, you know, very just twisted thing to do, and obviously Ken is so distraught over the choice, he just doesn't know what to do, and it's a bit confusing actually with the artwork. I don't know if they like actually sort of like confirm or not, because it's the way it's done is pretty weird. Hang on, I'm just trying to find the page here. Yeah, so like, as you know, Ken is just losing his mind. He doesn't know what to do. Like his son, or the, you know, innocent people, Luke and some of the PMC guys he's with, have managed to track him down and are about to like crash into the room. And there's a moment where like Ken is obviously losing it, and then he clicks. It's the panel here shows him clicking something that says stop, and then the time stops at 1 second, and then but he screams as he does it. But then, like, I don't know, like, maybe people, like, had a better idea of what happened here than I did, but, like, I assume he stopped it. Like, I assume he saved Mel, but we don't see a bomb go off, we don't hear a bomb go off. Like, because obviously the whole stipulation was, like, if Ken stops the timer, that's going to blow up on Mel's side, like, it's going to blow up another drone on another part of Nashal that's going to possibly kill people, and, like, we never see that happen, or we never hear about that happening. Like, he just presses stop, and then, so I don't know, like, maybe that did happen, and Ken has, like, sacrificed innocent people to save Mel. Maybe it was just a trick by JP, and that it did nothing the whole time, and it was just done to fuck with Ken, basically. I don't know, I thought that was a bit unclear. Like, my only real, like, criticism, I guess, in terms of, like, the paneling and the artwork and stuff like that, was, like, I just don't think that was really clear at all. We then get what I thought was a very frustrating moment here when Luke finally crashes into the room and he sees Ken, and like obviously Ken is still distraught, he's still wounded, he's still just so probably just disorientated by everything that's happening, and Luke sees like a phone on the floor, which is obviously the phone that Ken has just used to stop Mel being blown up. And Luke just immediately says, like, oh, you're the one that's been doing all this. Like, just no thought, no second guessing, just like I said earlier, like Luke has already made up in his mind that Ken is at fault. He is 100% the terrorist. That's you know, responsible for all this. Like, there's no doubt in Luke's mind. Like, he's already decided that. For this chapter, though, it ends with Ken being rescued at the last minute by a unknown woman. I'm pretty sure this is probably going to end up being JP's assistant, who I think was called Kamala. I may be wrong on that. I can't check it at the moment. But, yeah, she basically just arrives and comes in and basically just pulls Ken out of the way as Luke and the other PMCs open fire. The woman is shot, so obviously that's not great for her. And Ken ends up being pushed through a window, and again, judging by the artwork at the end, he basically has been pushed into a river and he's just kind of like sinking to the bottom, I guess, and then that's just where it ends. And yeah, that's chapter 3 done. So I'm kind of just going to go into my closing thoughts, I guess, and just give my overall opinion on just the chapter as a whole. So that's what we're going to do now. So chapter 3, overall, I would probably say, I don't know if I'd straight up say this is probably my least favourite chapter. It's strong contender, I guess, between chapter 2 and chapter 3. At the moment when I sit here, I feel like I remember less of chapter 2 than, I did. Actually, no, yeah, chapter 2 was Chun-Li and that stuff, and me not liking that whole change and all that. So yeah, I'd probably say chapter 2 is probably my least favorite so far. This was okay. Like, I didn't love it, but like I didn't hate it. I think probably the thing I was the least kind of like happy with, I guess, not, I don't know if it's happy is the right word, but I thought the artwork was a bit of a step down compared to the previous twos, which I thought, I thought chapter 2 was a step down from chapter 1, which is funny because chapter 1 was Bengis, who I'm not really a fan of his art anymore, but I still thought it was better than the art we've gotten for chapter 2 and chapter 3. So hopefully chapter 4's art picks up in that regard. But yeah, that's my only like real criticism, I guess, like obviously notwithstanding the stuff I've been talking about before. I've kind of realised, mostly based off how I've talked about things, but also some comments I've received on these videos, like doing these reviews, I kind of get the feeling it seems like I'm not enjoying this like comic series, and I am. I'm not in love with it. I don't think it's the best thing ever. Like, I see a lot of people online who are like, oh, this is the best, narratives like Street Fighter has done ever, and I'm like, I very much disagree. I think a lot of the games have had much better plots going on, but it's never, I think the format is what's helping this. Like, now, like, if this was just regular backstory, like, we never got this prequel series, but, like, just the kind of basics here of, like, oh, like, Ken did this, he was in Nishal, and, like, like, bios and stuff like we used to get for, like, back in the 90s for, like, Alpha and Street Fighter 3 and stuff like that. If that's what we had without this comic series, like, I wouldn't say any of this is particularly, like, strong. It's interesting, 100% it's interesting, but, like, I never think the comic format helps like boost the story to make it seem not better, but like make it just kind of like seem more like that has more depth than what I actually think it is. So yeah, like, don't get me wrong, I think it's great, and I think it's great that we have this format and like the actually caring about the story enough to do a prequel series. Like, I wish we'd had some of these for Street Fighter 5 and 4 and etc. like that. But yeah, like I very much disagree with some of the comments who are like, oh, this is the best narrative Street Fighter. I very much disagree. I think a lot of the other narratives in other Street Fighter games have been better. It's just that the format didn't really allow the narratives of those games to really shine, unfortunately. So it is what it is. But yeah, like that's my only real kind of like stance on the comic series so far. Maybe that'll change. Maybe chapter 4 will blow my socks off and I'll just be in awe at everything that happens. But I kind of doubt it. But I'm not gonna write it off. Like, I'm not gonna say, oh, this has sucked or anything. But like, it's been fun to do these and to cover these and to read them. But yeah, I definitely don't think this is like the best narrative or the best writing Street Fighter has ever had. Like, not even close to it. But I suppose that's for a kind of deeper topic when we finally finish this prequel series, which is next week. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to again, not to make it sound like, oh, I can't wait till this is done. Like, I am interested in seeing the finale, but like, it'll be a shame when it's done because it has been fun and it has helped May keep going along a bit quicker so that we can eventually get to like June when Street Fighter 6 itself comes out, because obviously that's going to be like the real like meat and potatoes of Street Fighter 6's story. So, but for now, yeah, like I am enjoying them. I think it is good, but like I'm not like in love with it like some people are. Like, I've seen on people like on forums and Twitter and stuff, like I've seen people just absolutely going not nuts for it, but definitely praising it a lot, and I think it is worth some praise, but I don't think it's like I said, I don't think it's the best like story the series has ever had or anything. But yeah, I'm gonna leave things here. Like, I thought this was a decent chapter. Like, I can't really I've already kind of like said what I thought about it. Like, I thought it was okay, not the best chapter, but not the worst. I definitely think chapter 2 probably was not as good. I think if Chun-Li doesn't show up in chapter 4, then I think chapter 2 was like kind of baffling in a way. Like, I don't know why she was even in the story really, but it's whatever. So yeah, I think that's it really. I can't really talk about anything else, so I'll just leave things here instead of rambling on like I always do. So until next week when we meet again, I shall see you all later. Goodbye.
We await your return, warrior.